Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. We are in what feels like the 13th month of 2020 and I am here with the lovely Tom Muller again. Thank you so much for joining us again on this deep dive into how to make a comic book logo. Tom, Happy New Year. How are you doing, sir?
Happy New Year to you. I'm very good, actually. I've had a pretty relaxed New Year and Christmas. I think the lockdown was kind of a weird bonus to just have it like, the two of us, no like endless dishes to wash, um, keep all the wine for ourselves.
That helps.
It was
That
good. It
helps.
was good. Was able to take a little bit of time out, but then after a couple of days, I got the itch again, so I had to start doing some bits and pieces. Can't help it. But yeah,
That's the curse of the
otherwise,
freelancer,
good.
isn't it? Because you don't
Yeah,
get
yeah,
paid when you have a holiday. Like this is what I don't
yeah,
think people realize. This like this is not a 9 to 5 job. If you don't work, you do not get paid. So you might have to take
exactly.
a couple of days off over Christmas, but you need to get
Yeah,
back
yeah,
cracking on it.
yeah. Yep. It's a hard life, but I mean, I'm not complaining.
Really, it sounds like you are.
All right, and thank you. Goodbye.
sorry. Um, People seem to really like the last chat that we had, and we actually
Hmm.
did have a question. So I thought we might as well start with that, and then we can
Cool.
go back to what we're going to talk about how you actually approach creating the logos. Because last time we talked about.
Yeah,
If you haven't seen the last video, I'll put a link in the description. Tom was he was very open and very honest about, how he broke into comics, how he does what he does, how he built his reputation, through networking and stuff like that. And, how he's worked with like people like Marvel, DC, Image and stuff like that, because he's amazing. And but in this one, what we've done is going to go in a little bit more detail about that. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link in the description. But one of the questions we had was from a chap called Mike Arani. Hi, Mike. Thanks for
hmm.
watching and your
Right,
support.
right.
He has said, I understand you've worked for both the big studios and create your own comics. And I understand in the case of Marvel and DC, you give away the ownership of the logos that you create. It's it, but when it's something like Image, do you preserve the rights over it, or do they go to the lead creator of the book?
Um, Good question. They go like in any case, they go to they're owned by the creators of the book, the owners of the IP, basically. Because even in like a creator owned environment, it is kind of a work for hire scenario. Like I will get commissions or I team up with whoever, whether it's with Alesh Kot or Ivan Brandon or top secret what I'm working on
Oh,
now.
come on, you
Um,
can't say that now.
yes, I can. Oh.
When
Um,
is that being announced?
um, well, it's an odd one. It is. I think that it has been kind of hinted at, but
Such a
it's not
tease.
officially announced yet. And I think the announcement is going to it's way off. It's going to be like
All right,
spring or summer before
fine.
the book is announced.
All right. Well,
But
I'm not saving this
again,
video till then. If you said it's going to be announced in 2 weeks, I was going to say, do you know what? You can say it because I won't release it till then. But spring,
oh no no
summer,
no no,
yeah, no.
it takes it's um it's a long while more. But the only, what hints can I drop? Well, I'm completely digressing from the question now, but um
We'll circle back. It's fine.
yeah, it's with a creator I've done work with or for before. Um, so
Okay.
that's quite nice. Yeah, it's like it's a really like amazing creator. I've read. I think the book is kind of ready. Um, so I've read that. It's gonna be, yeah. I think it's gonna be a really special book when
So
it comes out.
is this a writer artist? That person does both of it, or is it a
Ooh,
writer and artist team? Well,
ooh,
you said
narrowing.
but no, because
Yes,
you said it's a creative work before. So
it is a writer artist. Um,
right. Guess is in the
oh,
description. Like, put a guess. Your guess is in the description. And if you're right, do you know
yeah.
what? If you're right, and Tom goes yes, I will send you a prize. I will send you a prize. So yeah, go
Well,
on.
there are hints. So it's been on a few comic book news sites. Um, what kind of books or what that creator is doing. And then I put up like a week or two ago, like a really moronic tweet that might hint at my involvement, but
Such a
start
tease.
digging the internet.
Such a tease.
But
Such a tease.
but back to the question, even with that book, it's basically, it's slightly different, my agreement, than with most image books. Most image books I work on, I manage to get a percentage of the back end profits, because I usually get, and I think I might have mentioned it in the previous chat we had, but I usually get involved at such an early stage that I'm kind of become part of the whole creative team anyway. So that's a kind of like, I then feel, if that book is successful and that book would go on to have success outside of, like, the comics and the printed pages or the digital pages, I kind of like to have like a little tiny slice of that pie, because the work I've contributed to that book is going to be everywhere. It's part and parcel of how readers experience the book, etc. But regardless of like a little financial benefit I might or might not see, the actual logo is part of the IP that is owned by the co-creators or the creator of the book. So yeah, regardless if it's Marvel, DC, Valiant, Image, or whoever it is, I don't own any of those logos.
Fair enough, Mike. Well, hopefully, Mike, that answers your question. And Tom, what's the name of that creator again? Sorry.
It is.
Damn it!
Yeah?
That one time for my internet to go down and the connection to be dropped. Damn it!
Yeah.
It was worth a try. Worth a try. What can I say? Fair enough. Okay, so you've got a secret project that you're working on. It's going to be announced in spring, summer. So watch his space. If you don't follow Tom on Twitter, follow him. His name will come up at the bottom of the screen right.
Actually, there's
now.
a few projects that I'm working on that haven't been. I mean, some of them are in pitch stages.
Right.
Which I totally can't tell anything, because that's not even. It hasn't even landed the publisher. But yeah, I've just realized that actually, usually January is always like quite a quiet month.
Right.
Like in any kind of, like, either it's like, if it's comics or it's digital work that I'm doing, or agency work, it usually seems like it's usually the year always starts very quietly, and this has just been like pretty busy, with people suddenly, like, post lockdown 2020 going, right, let's kickstart all the projects that we couldn't realize last year. So yeah.
Do you think the lockdown and stuff has had that kind of effect on the comics industry, especially like independent and small press, where people have gone, do you know what, I'm not even going to try and put this through a publisher now, because they're they're hunkering down, they're going to see how the world is, that kind of thing. So like literally now there's going to be like just an influx of just people going pitching.
Yeah, I think so.
Crap. But there's chance of me getting something published then.
What's that?
There's chance of me getting something published then. There's too much competition this year.
No, but it's like, I really felt like last year a lot of, and not just indie and creator owned books, like even at Marvel, I know that a lot of books had been pushed back. I mean, even like the Ten of Swords crossover was pushed back and then expanded on because of the lockdown and like the pandemic and everything. So I think a lot of publishers have now kind of balanced out what the environment is like at the moment. Looking ahead, that hopefully everything will start to pick up again. So a lot of creators are naturally thinking, all right, now it's time to push forward again.
Fair enough. Inside to 2021 there, guys. And right, okay, so one of these projects that you can't talk about, you can't name, they come to you with this idea and they say, Tom, this comic is, a sci-fi book, or, a barbarian book, or something like that, is it, what was it? No, I'm going to try and trick you again. Just every now and then I'm like, oh, is it him? No, so they come to you with this idea and this genre. And so, how do you go from that stage into creating that logo? What happens next from that first initial meme?
Well, usually we talk about the kind of like just any kind of idea what the creator has in mind. Because usually when I get approached by a writer or artist, usually it's the writer that kind of engages me first. Um, they approach me with quite a solid kind of idea in mind about what the obviously what the book is about, what the pitch is going to be, um, and that kind of helps me to start forming an idea in my mind about what kind of stylistic leanings I should like kind of look into. Like sometimes they might come to me and say like, look, this is a book. This is going to be it's set in a very specific location in a specific time frame, or um, this is what the story is about, and I really like these kind of film posters, or um, here's like a few book covers that I really like, and I think those covers kind of capture the essence of the story that I want to tell. Um, so that's usually a good starting point for me to kind of get into the head of the writer, the creators, to kind of think about, okay, this is if they like say, a certain aesthetic that fits with the story, then it's my job to either kind of explore that aesthetic a bit further, or try and like I often try to kind of push that aesthetic a bit further. So instead of just coming up with say, um, let's say I'm doing a book that's like a western, instead of just coming up with like a very typical like what you would think of like a spaghetti western style logo, I'll kind of take that typographic approach and push it a bit further and push it a little bit beyond what you would expect if you think western logo,
Okay.
and just kind of take the essence of where does that typography come from, and then I would most likely um, go and do research. If I know like a book is set in a certain time period, I will go and look into um, kind of the history of what kind of typefaces and what kind of design language was prevalent, say in the 1850s or the 1960s or the 1970s, and then I'll try and use typography that's either from that time, so I'll find like a suite of typefaces that are very specific, or I will design something that leans into that general aesthetic of that time period to then design a logo or a masthead. So it's like I like to put a little bit of kind of like research into it rather than go, oh yeah, a cowboy logo or a western logo is like a bit rough, got like big serifs, got like block fonts, and I'll just do something like that. I'd rather try and kind of replicate elements, or like try to imagine if that logo would have been designed in that time period, what would it look like? And then I think you come to a much more like authentic and by extent more relevant design than just like choosing willy-nilly, or trying to get into a certain genre expectation.
Is it hard to in that instance? I like the idea that you kind of look at what's gone before. Let's say if the correct says
Mm,
spaghetti western, so you'll go do some research. You go look at Sergio Leone,
yeah,
film posters and stuff like that, and trying to get that feel. Is
yeah.
it a tough balance to not mimic it but homage it, but then to not go too far with it so it becomes unrecognizable with what it was?
Yes, I think that's kind of like that's the fine line that you need to balance when you're, because in the end you're still servicing the story and the book, and it needs to connect and be recognizable by whoever is going to be the audience of that book or that series. So if I go off and go like, say I go too nerdy or too esoteric with like oh yeah, this is like some obscure typeface I found that was like they only used it 10 times in 1976, but it's really beautiful, and I'll use something like that.
Hmm.
There's maybe going to be like two people that will recognize that kind of lineage.
Yeah.
But for anyone else, it's either going to be like, well, they're not even going to like, it's not going to register, or it might be so far removed from what the vibe is of the book that it doesn't really connect. So there's always that line between finding the kind of the right creative approach versus, does it work with the story? Does it actually lift the story and the concept of the comic itself?
Okay, so off there. So say okay, you've been told what the project is. It's a western. You've done your research. You've got an idea of how
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna go about it. So what's the next stage? Do you get the notebook out and you draw like five or six different kind of variants before you go to the next stage? What's the process there with like you've got the idea. So what happens?
Well, it depends on the kind of what the eventual style of the logo will be, but usually yes, it always starts with sketchbooks, and just like jotting down rough ideas, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be sitting there like drawing like really precise hand drawn versions of a logo. I know, like you see these things on like Instagram and Twitter, where like people would post these like very immaculately like drawn, like, oh yeah, I drew a logo like all by hand, and like you got the schematics and the pens and everything. But it's like it's rare that you would actually organically work like that, because it starts very rough and you just start to like sketch out like block shapes, and at one point you will then move, or I will move into, say, Illustrator,
Right. So that's
to then
what you
start.
primarily use to build your logos as an
Yeah,
illustrator.
yeah, yeah, yeah. To then kind of start refining things, or I will like in some instances I will hand draw or hand paint some logos, and then scan like, for example, the Homesick Pilots logo. That was actually, I'm gonna like kind of example of the process. So this here, these were like very early sketches when I was working on the Best of 2000 AD logo.
Okay.
So I just started like with some rough, like, the 2000 thing is going to be the main element
Yep.
of the title, and you can kind of see like one of the twos here is very close to what I eventually ended up delivering in terms of the logo. Some random things. Here's some sketches, actually, cover sketches when I was working on the Dawn of X collections for X-Men. So just kind of like trying to block out the shapes and the kind of like the structure of that cover template. And this was actually, that was started from like a very rough idea that Jonathan Hickman sent through, like, oh, what about like if we try something like that? And then it was me basically kind of taking those, like, that nugget of an idea and seeing how it can basically like work and be translated into a workable design. So you can see here the one at the bottom, that's where I kind of started to lean into what eventually turned out to be the cover for like the cover template for that series of books, with like a part of the X that becomes the window to place the art.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's basically that's usually how I usually start with like designing logos or covers, and there's always like a little bit of a yeah, like the organicness and the roughness of just starting to like draw out ideas without too many restrictions. And it's usually a lot more helpful to kind of get ideas going and to kind of get to a point quickly where you think, okay, this is direction that will work. Here you go. So this was basically like one of the first like things when I, because the whole idea was obviously if you've seen the book or read the book, that it's about these punk bands in the 90s. So there was this kind of DIY aesthetic that we wanted to bring through into the logo. So the final logo basically became this like a
Like a
mix of
fanzine kind of.
fans. Yes.
Yeah.
So these basically like were scanned in and then kind of tweaked in Photoshop, then brought back into Illustrator to kind of create and basically combine the built the logo out of like individual things. So I would say like I like this C or this K, this E works, and then that's how you end up with like the final logo in
Okay.
the end. And it's a mix of traditional kind of hand drawn uh, design, but then composed digitally
Okay.
instead of just going straight into like I'm just going to start moving like rectangles around in Illustrator, or just going to type some words and pick a font, which I think is still like where a lot of logos in comics fall flat, where you can kind of see where whoever created the logo just basically chose a font thinking that fits, that kind of has the vibe of the comic that I'm doing, and I'll just add some effects to it to make it like look either grungy or metallic or whatever, and that's then what the logo becomes. And I think if you bring like someone in with a more design led approach, you can blow that wide open and you can push those expectations a lot further.
So that's, so if someone was to, like if not that I create my own logos or anything like that. So if I was to like find a font, this is the kind of thing that I like the idea of, and do all that, the grunge bit stuff. Then the
Yeah,
best thing is to go to someone like yourself and go, this is what I envisioned, but can you take that to that next level? Because
yeah.
this is not, no disrespect to people that do that or what I've done in the past, like, because what I've done is the bare minimum, because I don't have that level of,
You what? Excuse me. You what?
no, but like this whole channel is about getting people to start off, start
Oh,
making
yeah,
their own comics. See,
definitely,
see,
definitely.
I have made my own logos for comics in the past and failed miserably. You could tell, like, they're exactly what you said. I don't mind admitting it. I've gone to shops, online stores, and bought fonts and stuff like that, and gone, oh, that
Yeah,
looks
yeah,
good.
yeah.
It goes with the comic, because when we start, a lot of time we can't afford, to hire to someone like yourself,
No, no,
and
no, no.
so
That,
it's doing everything. But it's nice to know that, if we were to bring, someone like you into a project, it's like I can still do that and say, this is what I have in mind. What can you do, and you can kind of take it to that next level, to
yeah,
that professional level. Because let's be honest, you are a professional in what you do. You're a designer. You're not just this is what you do for a living. You're not you're not a writer. You're not an artist. You're not an you are designer.
yeah.
That's
So
what
I
you do.
think I think there is a value in using um like quote unquote off the shelf typefaces that you basically just buy, or what you find pre-installed on your computer. I mean, and nowadays there's like there are a lot of good resources for um, free fonts, and I'm not talking about like the font and 1,001 fonts, but like Google Fonts, for example, has a lot of high quality um, fonts and typefaces available that you can use. And if
Yeah.
you've got like a subscription to an Adobe product, most of the time that comes packaged with Adobe Fonts. So you kind of there's there are very little, in my mind, um, options where you or like there's the situation where you would go, well, there are no good free fonts available, has like diminished a lot over the last few years. And so there's enough resources for anyone, regarding like regardless of what your budget would be to make the comic. And I think the key is to really choosing if the right typeface and the right fonts that go with your concept or with your idea, but then not kind of drowning that into effects and kind of visual kind of tricks to make it, to kind of weaken, I think, the impact of like what a good font, a good typeface, typeset properly, like on the cover, like can do, like that can have a lot of impact.
So,
Like for
sorry.
example, the when I designed the New World, the comic from Alice Cotton and Trad Moore, that logo was basically just me buying a font, typing out the New World, like manually typesetting it so it's like, you know, a big like sturdy block. Because the idea behind it was like we wanted to do something that's a bit kind of very graphic, very almost like propaganda like, and that becomes the logo, and that kind of like you built the cover around that. um, but that works in, as opposed to say designing a custom X-Men font or designing a custom font for Drifter, or you know doing 18 different kind of logo iterations for a book like Zero. So there is like the bandwidth is really wide in that regard.
So, what other mistakes? I can't even talk that. What's a mistake? I don't
No,
know.
no, no, no mistakes. Mistakes, good.
I've made a mistake there. So, what other obvious mistakes do you see from people starting off? You know, when they're creating comic book logos, are there? Obviously you mentioned about that. Is there any others you like? Well, standard.
Well, I think the biggest trap is to try and go beyond like a genre expectation. Like a fantasy book, for example, doesn't need to have like all these like frilly, like Lord of the Rings ish. Like, but you know, when I say like Lord of the Rings or fantasy, and like you get this mental image of what you think. Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
gonna be fantasy. Like very like metallic. Everything is kind of shiny and beveled, and like it's been hewn either out of stone, or like someone has um like, you know, it's a sword and then the sword becomes a letter, and you know those kind of things. And we'll have like some kind of ornate swashes, or maybe like a piece of cloth or a cape, and you get these. And the thing is, the graphic intensity of a logo like that starts to compete with what is usually like a painted artwork on the cover, and so you don't get that distinction. Like you it becomes very hard to differentiate that logo from the art. And you always want one or the other take the lead visually, and kind of like, you know, when you walk into a store, you see covers, your eyes either going to be drawn to the copy or the image. But if you try to give both equal kind of visual prominence, it just becomes very muddy,
Uh,
and you lose like that Spider-Man cover behind you, you know, the poster, like you see the like the Spider-Man
Not the
logo.
minion, the poster.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at you. um it's um you know, you immediately read the title because it's in white against like a very kind of colorful like piece of art. But you can see like they both work in harmony, and it's not like I can't make out the title, or the title is overpowering the artwork, and it kind of it works as a like as a whole. And that's, I think, where a lot of people, or like a lot of covers often get it wrong, where you know you're putting too much too you're trying to emphasize um both elements. Like in both elements, I mean like the dress and the art. And I think you need to add like a lot of contrast. So that's why, like in my personal like view on design, is that I always try to get the logos and kind of like any kind of cover dress and design as minimal as possible, like very, because it also becomes a bit more timeless and neutral, um, where I can basically, I either try to have the design be the main thing that catches your eye, or I flip it in reverse and the art is like the logo and the design is in surface of the artwork.
But then that kind of goes back to what you said in the previous video. Again, if you haven't watched it, I'll put a link in the description where you said it's best to get someone like yourself involved at the very beginning so you can kind of
Mm.
plan and get that balance. Because like you said, if you spent all
Yeah,
your time creating that spaghetti western logo and the cover image comes back and it's so detailed, so ornate, and so's your logo,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
gonna compete and it's gonna cancel each other and it's just gonna make it look
yeah, yeah,
confusing.
yeah,
Okay, okay.
exactly.
Yeah. So you've done your sketches, you've brought them into Illustrator. With regards to, you said earlier, like you got you created the new world font. You just went and bought a font or stuff like that. How does that work with the licensing? Because obviously, like you've bought it from whatever website you have, and then you've changed it. Is there certain licenses you need to buy when you buy that font from that website or that creator?
Well, when you buy a typeface, buy a font, usually on whichever platform or type foundry that you buy from, you basically buy the font for a certain amount of computers.
Right.
So usually the minimum is 1 to 3 machines. That means that I can buy it, install it on this machine. I can install it on, if I have a secondary machine, or if I've got like a very small design studio, up to 3 people can basically within that.
So if you used to
Um,
expand as a company, you can't say, well, you can't work on that because I've got that font on this PC. You can.
yes,
Okay.
but also if you suddenly scale up and have a company, and this is like, I see this in like the work I do in like the design industry and at design agencies. Um, Say when a brand redesigns, usually they'll have to have a font, like, the company's brand font, which is used on all collateral and communications and whatever. So you need to have a license that covers, say, 100 people or more. um, and that costs, that can then become exponentially expensive. But if you basically, if it's just you buy your font, you design your comic, it goes to print, and your comic can sell 5 copies, it can sell 500,000 copies. Doesn't matter, because you created, like, you're not basically sending that font out there like
As is kind of thing. You're
unlicensed.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're making those
So
creative changes to make it unique and bespoke
yeah,
to that comic.
yeah.
So it's not
And
just a generic one.
if you yeah, and if you send over like design files, you just outline all the fonts. So you're not really sending the font onwards beyond like the license that you've bought it for. um, which, can sometimes be a bit of a hassle for third parties. If, say, for example, a book at Image, um, we, like, every book that I've worked on for Image, the final production kind of pipeline is at Image. They will basically put everything together, make it ready for print, and then it goes to the printers. So sometimes they'll need to do like last minute changes, and it's like, oh, I don't have the font, and then I'll have to do the changes and resend the files. But that's really the way to do it. However, what I was just saying, when you've got things like Google Fonts and Adobe Fonts, that kind of creates blanket licensing. As long as you've got, if you've got a copy of Adobe Creative Suite and I have a copy of Adobe Creative Suite, we can just, like, just make sure we download and activate the same fonts, and then that's fine, and there's no problem. The only difference is that a platform like Adobe Fonts at one point can say, oh, we're going to stop licensing this typeface, which means all your designs break. And then you'll have to go and buy an individual license and buy the actual typeface yourself.
Okay.
Um, Google has a massive library that's completely free. So you can basically rely on that to, like, design everything and have it, um, have it shared with like as many people as need to work on that project.
Okay, okay.
At
So
least the that's how I've
you've been doing
you
it
know
wrong. You're
kind of.
going to start getting a bill come through for this. Going
Oh
to use
yeah,
that
yeah.
font, use
No,
that
no,
font, use
no,
that
no.
font, use that font,
I
use
don't
that
I don't use Google Fonts in my designs.
font. Do is it a trade secret? Can we ask where you get your fonts from?
Oh no, I mean like I use I've many on many occasions used Adobe Fonts. Um, with sometimes it depends on the client. So with when I did Best of 2000 AD, um, there was a when we were talking about like, okay, what are we going to do, like the design, and because it wasn't just the design, it was the design of the logo and the cover, it was the design of the full publication. So tables of contents, like all editorial kind of pages within the comic, within the publication. So Rebellion Publishing was kind of saying, okay, we have an Adobe license, so we try to limit the fonts that we use
To what they
to
can get and what they
Adobe.
own within Adobe.
Yeah. Um, by the way, if you hear, I'm not sure
I
if you
can
can
hear. I
hear
can
like,
pick up. I can hear some thumping. I mean, your neighbours
yeah,
are obviously making most of the lockdown.
yeah, no, they're like next door. They're like renovating the house, so it's been like it's been a pleasure like the last 2 weeks of like hammering and drilling and thumping and scratching. Um, but I mean, the same happened with Marvel, and I can't remember if I talked about that last in the previous chat, but Marvel again, because Marvel is exponentially bigger than like most comic book publishers, and has such a variety of books with like creative teams all over the world. So what they have is, and this is kind of like very similar to a lot of big companies, they have enterprise licenses with type foundries. And that means that you basically pay a monthly fee and you get access to everything in that foundry's catalog. So when you design something new, it's take a pick. Here's 500 fonts, pick one. And so initially with when we started working on the X-Men rebrand, I had gone off and like, here's some new typefaces that we can use. And then pretty fast like very early on in the process, we kind of hit that wall where it was like, oh yeah, no, but we can't license anything beyond the agreement that we have with I think it's Monotype, that Marvel uses. So then it became a kind of an exercise in trying to find a new set of fonts within the kind of like applicable license, uh, and then we kind of ended up with the typefaces that we have, which luckily were covered by the blanket license with Monotype. So we still kind of were able to do what we were envisioning in terms of like design and tone of voice.
Any advice? Are there any references or any books you'd recommend to people that are gonna want to do what you do? Become a logo maker. Is anything you'd say like check this book out? Start from here. This is the foundation of that career in design.
Mm. Yes, I'm just looking at my bookshelf. Um, well, the main thing is like when you like uh, have to look into like history of logo design, the kind of like the mechanics of designing logos and what goes with it. Like avoid anything that has to do with comics, basically, and look at like no, but I mean, I've never really looked at other comics, past and present, as like, oh, this is how I need to design a comic book logo again, which I think is a um, one of the pitfalls that I see happening in some on some comics and comic logos, because you can kind of see where people are basically just referencing what came before, and it's like, oh yeah, a superhero comic logo looks like this, so that's how I'm going to design my logo. And it might not be applicable, it might not be right, or it might become outdated pretty fast, or even worse, you might not even notice it on the shelves because it looks like everything else. So you need to kind of
Don't replicate, innovate.
don't replicate and kind of look outside. Yeah.
Not bad.
Don't replicate
Anyone would think I'm a writer?
Yeah. Hang on. Let me just kind of grab some books. Right. What do we got? This is a must-have for every aspiring graphic designer.
Okay.
Because it. This is just. But it's this is kind of like a monograph on Josef Muller-Brockmann, who was a graphic designer, art director, creative director. But he did a lot of, he's kind of one of the main figureheads when you think about mid-century Swiss modernist design.
Which I think about quite often, if I'm honest. You know, I sit there contemplating that quite a bit.
I feel a tinge of sarcasm. just a little bit, but it's that kind of like timeless functional design. Okay. And that kind of like it's more about like the theory and the approach. Actually, this is another one, another book that he actually authored.
Grid systems, raster system.
So I mean, this is old in terms of like, you know, this was published in 1981, but as you can see, other things to contemplate. It's all about like, you know, grid structures and layouts and how you can basically create graphic systems and structures for publications. And you might think that's not really necessarily applicable to comics straight away, but it does. I mean, if you look at a comic book page, it's grids, it's rasters, it's kind of like that structure. So it's like kind of like, you know, taking like using that as a kind of as a basis, as a jumping off point. This is quite recent. This is basically just a book full of cool new typefaces, and it's just all about type design.
Okay.
So again, you wouldn't really immediately see that there's like a link with say comics, but it's all about like, you know, visual culture and you know, that kind of looking beyond like the genre. And maybe one of these typefaces might be you know,
might be suitable for your book. Yeah. It's like you said. It's. I like the fact that I never thought for that. You know, because even, you know, when I've looked at logos, you look at other comics for inspiration. It's like, actually you kind of need to look away from it because you don't want to copy what's already been done. You kind of want something more unique that stands out. And that's one thing you can say about your logos is they are very unique. You can tell that, you know, there's a lot of graphic design work put into them. And it's not just, you know, you've not just gone, okay, well, I'll look at that Spider-Man one and I'll create something similar.
Yeah, exactly. But then, I mean, it's not just about, like looking at those kind of like design, like theory books, but like this is like stuff like this is also quite cool because it basically like untold stories behind 29 classic logos. So, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's basically like, I'm just pick one quick. It's more about like the like how did like, okay, for example, this one, you know, how did that come along? And it's kind of about the thinking behind the creation of a logo and how that kind of, you know, the influence of the designer versus the kind of like the subject matter for the client, and how that kind then becomes um, a brand identity. And I think that's kind of like how, you know, another like kind of pertinent to publishing, like, you know, how did these things kind of come along, and you know, these things are very timeless.
Well, penguins are known to be big readers. You know,
Yes,
they.
we've got time. There's nothing much
I
to
can't
do.
fly, so might as well read.
No, but it's that kind of like, that's where I look when I'm you know, when I'm kind of like, you know, looking for
Inspiration.
inspiration and kind of, oops.
Do you ever get to the point where, you know, someone comes to you with a project and they say, you know, it's a sci-fi love story, and you go, I already know what I'm doing for that, like, because you've been doing this for such a long time, you've done all the research, you've got that knowledge in the back of your head where you can just go, do you know what? I don't need inspiration. I know exactly what I'm doing for that book.
Uh, yes, sometimes that happens. Um, but it's there's still always like a little bit of exploration that needs to happen, because even if I would think like I know exactly what this is going to be, it might still be different from what the creator has in their mind. Um, and then, you know, or like the story changes. Like if I'm being brought into the project really early on, what sometimes happens is that, okay, this is the pitch, this is the concept, we need the logo. I'll start designing that logo, and then like a little while later, while we're still, or like while the creators are still kind of formalizing and working at the early creation stage of the story, there might be a change, and then you have to, you know, that might like completely change the kind of like the design direction that you were going in. So there always needs to be that flexibility.
I mean, without naming names, have you ever had to, you know, walk away from a project?
Walk away.
Yeah, you know, like you and the creative team, you know, just haven't, you just can't see eye to eye. Like they have this vision, and like you've come up with logo ideas, and they've just gone, it's just not working. Like you basically,
uh,
someone's been such a dick, you can't work with them.
no, not in that respect, but and I think we it was actually like discussed, I think in an article for print magazine, when I was when I joined the team to work on the Weatherman for Image Comics. We went through a very drawn out process in the beginning to get to the logo where we ended up with, and we had a lot of back and forth between myself and uh, Jody and Nathan. And in the end, we kind of we decided that, okay, we've gone as far as we can. um I got paid for the work that I did, and then the guys were like, okay, we're just gonna take a step back and reevaluate, and maybe like see if, you know, if there's like another direction that we can go into. But in that creative process, in that going back and forth, I had already, what in my mind, presented them what the logo should be. And like, you know, listening to them and kind of talking about, like, you know, what the vibe is of the book, and how the book is going to evolve. um I had basically, like, I think in the second or third round, presented them with like, I think this is the logo that we need. This kind of fits, it ticks all the boxes, it's bold, it does all the things that I think a logo and the masthead needs to do. But the guys weren't really convinced, so we kind of like kept iterating and iterating until we were basically like just like digging a hole in the ground and not really like
Just going around in
going too
circles,
deep.
and it's not getting
Yeah,
any
yeah, yeah.
better.
So so we kind of took a pause, and then after I think a month or two later, we kind of picked up conversations again, and then we kind of like circled back to that logo that I had kind of flagged early on as like this is the one that we need. And so if you can kind of see the poster in the back,
I can.
so that's eventually that's that's the logo that we ended up with. But that wasn't like in any way there wasn't any animosity or like really like the kind of creative differences where people just go like, I can't, this is impossible. But it was like one of those situations where you kind of you're so like involved and so deep or so close to the actual thing that you kind of forget to, or like you lose the bigger picture,
You'd
and you
step
kind of
back.
like focus on,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that kind of that break that we had um helped us to kind of realize that, okay, we've kind of like we overshot the point where we had a good idea. um but yeah, beyond that, I don't think I've ever had a bad experience
Okay. Okay.
in terms of like having creative differences.
And
I
I
mean,
hope you
there's
never have
been
one. I hope you never have one.
yeah, oh, knocking on wood and like throwing salt. um I think the only time where we really parted ways was, and this is 10, 12 years ago, um, when I had a stab at redesigning the Iron Man logo for Marvel, and that just ended up nowhere because it was I think at that time I had I think I wasn't maybe insightful enough to grasp what they needed.
Okay.
And I think at the same time there it felt to me like, I think this was around the time the first Iron Man movie had come out. The second Iron Man movie was about to be released. And so there was this kind of dilemma. What I sensed from Marvel back then was, do we steer the branding into the film direction, or do we keep it
Its own separate
very
entity.
comic book
Yeah, yeah.
specific? Um, and so I was kind of like designing like very loose, like, okay, here's something that looks like the movie one, this is like comic book one, here's like something
You're
really
trying to
weird.
appease both ends, and
Yeah, and I think in the end, um Marvel paid me a kill fee. um we walked away amicably, and then I think Marvel just used one of the existing logos they had going forward. So I mean, these things happen, um but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a negative.
no, no, not at all. I mean, I've
Yeah,
had it in my writing, where I've looking for an artist on a project, and I found them. They've done a test page, and it's been exactly what I've been looking for. And then we get a little bit further down the line, and the comic, it just doesn't work the way it's meant to. The art, it's not what I envisioned, and
yeah,
it's you both kind of know, we're like, there'll be. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm quite nice to work with, and nice, flexible, and I'd be like, can you tweak this?
yeah,
And it gets to the point where it's the whole project's just not coming together, and I've
yeah,
let them keep the money, and just like, fortunately, we both know it's not working. Let's do it. And I've never fallen out with a creator that I've worked with. So you can part companies, amicably. I can't even say it.
amicable.
Amicable, and and everyone be happy. So no, I was just interested because obviously you work with different, not just in comics, but with brands outside of comics, stuff like if you're ever had to walk away, it just interested me. Just wanted some dirt. That was all. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. So I mean, for someone like yourself, and I'm not asking for me, so don't worry. I'm just so if do you pick and choose? Obviously, have you got the luxury of now pick and choosing like the projects that you want to work with? Like if someone came out of the blue, like a small press independent creator, said, "Tom, I've seen you on Match Channel, and I've read the, I've seen the logos that you've done, really like it. Are you more selective with who you work with now, and what do you look for in a creative team that you want to work with? Because you have worked with some massive names, but you've also worked with some people that were unknown at the time and now are names. How has that changed for you guys? For you?
Um, I do. I mean, I think I'm quite lucky in that respect that I can pick and choose what I work on. I think it has to do with few things. Um, Primarily, if is this like a concept that I can get behind? Is this something that I think is interesting? And does the project give me the amount of creative freedom and to a certain extent control over how the design will be executed. Um, it has to do with, then on a very subjective level, it's going to be like, do I like this writing? Do I like this art? Do I want to do I want to see my logo or my design associated with this book? I mean, being really honest, I think that should go for every kind of creator. Like you want to have your work be shown and seen in the best light possible. That's why you would engage a certain artist or a certain letter or a certain colorist, because you feel that those people will really like lift the full product into, like, to a certain level that you alone wouldn't be able to reach. um I mean, and I think that's the beauty of comics, and kind of like, creating comics, because it's like really this, your the end product is built on the individual strengths of every single key player in that team. The writer, the artist, whether there's an inker involved or a painter, color artist, the letterer, design, it all kind of, you know
You got to feel
comes
that
comes
match to
together.
it.
So you want to, so I think I try to, and I know like certain color artists as well are becoming more and more picky, because I mean, picky in the best possible way, because you want to be able to commit to a certain quantity of work without having the quality suffering.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's only
that
so many
event,
hours in a day, isn't there? So there's only so many projects you
exactly.
can work
So
on in a year, and so you need to be more selective about what you want to take on, and look what benefits you and your career and the
yeah,
projects that you're enjoying.
yeah. So there's always going to be the kind of, I mean, there's always going to be people that you won't be able to work with because of time constraints. There might be people that you just like, you don't feel a connection with the work that's being proposed, which I think is very important, because the more invested that you are in the concept and the story and the art and the writing, the better your work is going to be as well. Because I want to avoid where it becomes like just another job where I'm just like pushing out logos for, whatever.
Yeah, because you might have
And it's
stayed in
just
the
like,
corporate
yeah,
industry and worked with them, but where you're
yeah,
dealing with faceless organisations, you want to work with the collaborators. So,
yeah, 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 yeah.
from what you just said, it sounds like you actually, read the script and you look at any art that's been produced. That helps you determine if you're on board for that project.
Yes, very much.
Have you ever had to turn down a project, and then because obviously you've been too busy, and then like you've seen it, you go, oh, I wish I had that chance. I'd love to have got my hands on that.
No. Oh, yes. One book that I turned down, um, because it was just like couldn't fit it in, was Ice Cream Man.
Oh, okay, good book. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was just like at a time where I was either too busy or too tired to, like, take on another book.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really at that, I think at that point I couldn't really justify like taking on the book and then doing a good job with, like, regularly, like creating the designs for the issues, even though I had worked with him on the design of his oh, it's been so long, I forgot the name. 24 hours in the library,
Okay.
the kind of like the OGN he did um before Ice Cream Man. So it wasn't about I don't want to work with you. It was more like I just
Just don't
don't
have
have the
time.
bandwidth to take anything on.
It's fine. What is the best, like, again, not coming from me, but like, or, I'm not asking you to this, but if someone was to approach you about, working with you, getting you involved at the start, what is the politest way and the best way to approach you or any kind of designer? What would be the ideal way to do it? Not just tweet and go, Tom, I love your work. I'd like you to do a logo for me. You know, you
Oh,
know.
I've got loads of those emails. It's like it's hard to kind of where you just get like a one line message of like, I like your work. How much do you charge?
I don't think it works.
I
Yeah,
mean, it's hard. I mean, I try to reply to as many emails as possible, but sometimes you kind of or they just like disappear in the noise. I think. I mean, there's a few. There's like I actually now you're reminding me of someone I have to get back to. See, this is. I mean, it's bad, but sometimes like sometimes something slips through the cracks. Um, but I mean, if you want to work with me, I'd like to see some stuff that you've been working on, or like, we're working on this. What do you think? Go, instead of just going like, I like your work. How much do you charge? Because that's like, how long is a piece of string?
yeah. Okay.
And I also need to be like, especially like, what we were just saying when we started today's chat about, like, freelancers never have a holiday. I do need to think in some ways about like, okay, how much can I earn on this piece of work?
What? How
And
dare
real
you? Money?
Oh, I do
Ah,
it for the
do it for the
love,
love.
the
You
love.
could eat
It's
love.
just
Love sandwich.
the warmth.
The heat,
Um,
heat. I need
but
heat.
yeah, the heat from my computer. Um, but it's. I mean, it's a very realistic thing that I have to consider as well. Is like, how feasible is this book? Because many times it might be like, someone who has an idea, who wants to pitch a book to a publisher, and then can if I can help out with a logo or like do some design work,
Hmm.
and then either the budget is very very small or it's non-existent, and there's the hope, okay, we get a back end deal, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I need to really weigh the options in terms of like, how much time can I afford on this versus, is this going to eat into time that I can spend on surefire
Paid
income
work. Yeah.
versus, is this going to be a passion project that is never going to end up anywhere? And I've done those. I've done. I mean, I've worked on books where I've not seen a dime, but they're good books. They're help me, like, evolve and land bigger projects, both in and outside of comics, kind of thing. But those are like realistic expectations, like and realistic kind of benchmarks that I need to set in terms of like what I work on. But yeah, generally speaking, if you're interested in working with me on, say, specifically a comic or a graphic novel, like talk, like present the project to me.
Fair enough.
You
No,
know,
that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
make me excited about working on this
Pitch to you as if you
instead of
was a publisher.
yeah, instead of no, but yeah, I think opening with like I like your work. How much?
Yeah, don't do that.
It's
Don't do that.
yeah,
Make Tom excited, or any other any other creator that you want to make. Trying to make them excited about it. Again, exactly
yeah,
the same as when I'm looking for an artist collaborator. I want people to work on projects because they're excited about them. They want to work because it shows in the work. If someone's happy and like this is going to be a great comic, not that they work harder, but you could see that there's love put in it. So
yeah,
no, I get that. I get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Right, I've taken up a lot of your time, but before we go, I'm just going to ask any other advice for people that want to, start making their own logos. Anything that you'd say to them, apart from, just go practice and make logos. Any other, nuggets of wisdom that you could throw out there into the sphere?
Um, call me. uh, I don't know. I mean, we've covered a lot. I mean, like between this chat and the previous one, I think a lot of the advice is kind of obvious.
To
And
you,
it's
you say
to
that,
me,
but that's the reason
I
why
mean,
I'm doing this channel, because sometimes the most obvious thing is the stuff that people overlook.
yeah, but it's sorry, I'm just kind of looking at a van. I'm expecting a parcel, so I'm just kind of no, he's not going into my direction. No, I actually I bought a piece. I bought a piece of Anand's. I bought a page from Anand from Blue and Green,
Okay.
and it's been delayed in the post since mid December. And I
Right.
got a notice this morning, like the
Out for
package will be
delivery.
delivered today. So I'm like the whole day, like, is this a car? Is it a van? Is it the postman?
Oh.
But and then I'm gonna get it, and it's gonna be like bent.
Oh, don't. That's horrible. Don't even joke about
Um,
that.
but I mean, in terms of like things being obvious, I think it's it, it, I mean obvious in the sense that it doesn't necessarily need to be complicated. Like whatever, like the design doesn't need to be complicated or intricate to such an extent that you start to like drown out what the actual point was to begin with. um I think, and I said this last time as well, like don't just look at comics, like because you're surrounded by all kinds of design all day all night.
If you can go out.
So yeah, well, you've got TV, you can look
Oh,
out
yeah.
the
Oh, okay.
window,
All right. Okay. All right.
the internet, but it's like you've got in these lockdown times, you've got whatever's on TV, what you read online, what you like, video games, music. um I mean, the list is endless. Like if you just like look behind you, anything that's
Pay attention to what's
like
out there.
book covers, like anything, like even like the red like holder that I have on the wall, like those shapes, you can just look and you're like, oh yeah, one of them can look like maybe that's a D. Oh, that's a letter. Oh, maybe I can like the abstract things. Um, the one thing that has always stayed with me, and this is now I'm going back to like when I was 15, 16, and it was in art high school. um I'm not sure if you're familiar with the graphic novel The Forever War.
No.
It's a graphic novel adaptation from the novel by Joe Haldeman, which is this kind of allegory of the Vietnam War, but set far in the future.
Okay.
Astronauts, space soldiers, that kind of stuff. Like I'm not doing it justice in any way or form, but the graphic novel was basically created by a collaboration between a Belgian artist called Marvano and Joe Haldeman, the original author. And the artist had a background in architecture. He used to be an architect. He's now since become a full-time comic book artist. Very well known in Europe. The Forever War was adapted. I think it's been published in English a few times. I think Titan published it a year or two ago, serialized it in comic book format. But um, there was a news piece on him on the release of the book, because it was quite a big deal, because it's a very famous novel. It was quite a big thing that a Belgian artist would adapt this into graphic novel format. And like, they were talking about the spaceships, and just how do you create that, translate that novel into like a visual medium, and you design all these spaceships. And the artist, like, basically he just picked up like an electricity plug, and he was like, oh yeah, so this, see, I thought this was an interesting shape. And then they kind of fade to like the drawing, and you kind of go, oh shit, like the nose cone of that massive space freighter is basically
That plug.
a wall plug, a socket. And I thought, like, that is genius. That's just, you know,
I've just thought of a really, really like stupid version of that. In like The
yes.
Simpsons, the Mr. Sparkle episode where Homer sees the Japanese soap packet. And he's like, oh my god, how did they come out with that? And he's like, it's a plug and a light bulb come together. That's, sorry, you've taken something really beautiful and artistic, and I've just dumped it down to Homer Simpson. Sorry.
But it's that kind of like out of the box thinking, because I mean, it's like, well, I can look at like any kind of like, how do spaceships look in movies, and I'll just use that as a basis. But I mean, it's the same thing with is it Alien? I think it's the Nostromo, that basically is like an oil drill platform, but in space. Yeah, so there's like all these things where you go like, okay, I need to design something, I'm gonna look at anything. And I think the same goes for design, and especially designing
Just
comics.
be inspired about what's around you. Tom, again, I could.
Isn't that a beautiful bow to end this chat?
It's like, do you know, I could genuinely talk to you for hours about this. It fascinates me. I'm just not just in comics, but the whole design aspect of everything. It just, if it's creative, it fascinates me. And the way stuff's made, like you said, like about the plug, it's like it's just amazing. Sorry, I'm just freaking out there for a second.
So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a subtle hint at the third episode forthcoming.
Honestly, Tom, if you ever want to come back on, absolute pleasure. If you want to, share your screen and show us how you make a logo or something like that,
yeah,
you can have the whole time. I will just sit there and just watch and draw how you do it. Next time we can do that.
Next time I'll actually prepare. Not unlike last time when I had prepared and we just didn't do anything. Like
we kind of just fell down that rabbit hole of talking about process and how you got, but people seem to really like it, and I think they're going to love this one. As always, you are the gift that keeps on giving. You're an absolute pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much for doing this. And remember, guys, if I can make comics, anyone can. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.